Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. You know what I'm about to say. Download the app, share it with your friends and family. You'll have access to all of our station's content, not just the front line with Joe and Joe, keeping in mind we are an EWTN affiliate, so you'll get all that content. Also, if you like what Joe and I do, we post all these videos online, X, Rumble, Facebook, YouTube, and we go live Thursday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern time, where we get into a whole lot of trouble. So if you like the content, help us get out to a wider audience. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Today, Joe and I are truly honored to be joined by a very prolific author, George Weigel. We're here to discuss his new book, out from Ignatius Press, Pomp, Circumstance, and Unsolicited Advice, Commencement Addresses, and University Lectures. Now, that's available at Ignatius Press. I'm sure it's available on Amazon and other places. And, of course, Father Fessio would want me to mention, go to your local Catholic bookstore, ask them to order a few copies, put it on the shelf. We promise that they won't stay there too long. Now, many of you out there, my guess is all of you out there know George Weigel. He is a distinguished senior fellow at Washington's Ethics and Public Policy Center. He's a New York Times bestselling author of more than 24 books, as I said, prolific, including the 2 volumes of his internationally acclaimed biography of St. John Paul II, Witness to Hope and the End and the Beginning. Other works by Weigel include The Fragility of Order, The Next Pope, Evangelical Catholicism, and not forgotten, George Weigel. Welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe, our brother.
Thank you, Joe and Joe. And while we're on the subject of unsolicited advice on October 6th, if you guys can't figure out how to keep Vlad Guerrero Jr. in check, the Yankees are going down in a hurry. And
kind of looks that way. You had to hit us in the gut, George, early in the morning.
well, you know, I used to put Mickey Mantle baseball cards in the spokes of my bike when I was a kid, as a sign of my disdain for the Yankees. Also as a sign of my stupidity, because I could have bought half of Antigua with 3 of those cards right now.
Where'd you grow up, George? Oh, there we go.
I'm an Oriole.
Yeah, for Joe and I, it was Catfish Hunter. So we came along a little bit later, but yeah, seriously, George, Joe and I mean, we love talking to all the authors out there, Catholic figures and writers like yourself. Certain topics we like more than others. Education, we really like talking about that. We're very intrigued by the title of your book and the content. So what I'll do is I'll throw it over to Joe, and we will have a great conversation. Joe Resinello.
George, it's our custom. We always say a prayer to Our Lady before we begin. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, for you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. Mother, the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Well, little confession, George. We have a lot of authors on the show. We're on the radio 2 times a week, and we get all the books from all the publishers and all the marketing people. I read your book immediately when I got it, in all fairness. As Joe Pasillo said, this is a topic that's definitely on our radar. We've had a number of people on the show, including Bishop Strickland, talking about Catholic education. I went to Catholic school. I went to University of Scranton. I got my graduate degree from St. Peter's University, better known as Harvard on the Hudson. Joe Pasillo went to Seton Hall. So we're very versed in Catholic education. I went to a Christian Brothers high school. I mean, I know the deal. With that said, your book was very inspirational. I want to first say that. Very inspirational. But here's why I brought up all that, and this is what I'd like you to comment upon. The schools you're talking to, authentically Catholic schools, and what you're saying was, if you ask me, spot on. You have your finger on the pulse of the culture. You have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in Catholic universities. It's not Georgetown. It's not Notre Dame where you're talking. And if you ask me, if I'm the average Catholic parent who has a high-achieving kid in New Jersey, in New York, in Connecticut, that parent is gearing their kid to go to Georgetown, to go to Boston College, to go to Holy Cross. And that's not where you're talking. And frankly, that is something I want to highlight. What are your thoughts on that, just to begin?
Well, to begin with, I wouldn't put all of those eggs into the same basket. I think a student can get a perfectly fine Catholic education at Notre Dame. They're going to have to learn how to bob and weave through the curriculum and the faculty, but Notre Dame remains in many respects, because of the students, an intentionally Catholic place. Georgetown, Holy Cross, BC, that's a different story. And if parents don't recognize that, fellas, that's because they simply haven't been paying attention for the last 25 years. Now, as it happens, I have spoken at all of those campuses. It's been in the course of lectures, not commencement addresses. So I do have some sense of what's going on there. And what has happened is a detachment of faith from reason and reason from faith. And as John Paul II said in the 1998 encyclical Fides et Ratio, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of the truth. Now, if you take one of the wings off, you're lucky if you get Sully to land you in the Hudson River, because you're usually going to crash and burn here. And unfortunately, that is what has happened, not only at Catholic colleges and universities, but at Catholic high schools. So one just has to pay attention to what's going on in these places and not assume that because they still carry a Catholic brand, that there is something recognizable as Catholic in either curriculum or faculty or mode of life on campus at these places.
George Weigel is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Please go out and buy his book, Pomp, Circumstance, and Unsolicited Advice, Commencement Addresses, and University Lectures. It's available at Ignatius Press. I will post a link to Ignatius so you could just go directly to the website and purchase the book. So, George, you said a lot of people, perhaps parents, are not up to speed on a lot of these things. Let me go here real quick just to lay a little foundation. The university itself. I remember it's got to be about 15 years ago, Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Fry, the British actor, they're in a debate with a couple of English Catholics. I forgot their names. And basically the argument was the Catholic Church never contributed anything to Western civilization, which is you could dismantle that in about 12 minutes. All right. But the university, just because there was learning in ancient Greece and Rome and other areas, that doesn't mean you had a university system. That the way we think of a university system. The Catholic Church, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the Catholic Church created the university system. We're the ones who built it. We understood something about education and learning that did not exist prior. Talk about that so all the Catholic parents out there know exactly how fundamental and important the Catholic Church was to this university system that we take for granted.
Well, as I say in the foreword to the book we're discussing, the Catholic Church invented what we know as the university in the High Middle Ages, in places like Bologna, Paris, Oxford, Cambridge, etc. And what was different about these places from the, say, Aristotle's Academy, which was more like a private tutorial operation, is that the university in the High Middle Ages was a community. It was a community of scholars and students. It was a community of open debate in which even the most learned men were expected to be able to defend publicly their ideas against all comers in a debate format that were called questiones disputate, disputed questions. So if you're at the University of Paris in the 13th century and you're trying to choose between, Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure, two doctors of the church, for your theology course that semester, you get to go check them out, taking on all comers in an open debate format. Secondly, these were that's the first characteristic, a kind of openness of mind to exploration. I think I would say the second characteristic is that it was understood that faith challenges reason to broaden its horizons, not to settle for thinking low, but to think high, ask the big questions. And reason purifies faith from superstition, which is a point that Pope Benedict XVI made for over half a century. Now, when you get to today, and again, I go to the foreword of my book, and you have a president of Harvard University 20 years ago, Dr. Drew Faust, a very distinguished Civil War historian, nonetheless say in her inaugural address, we used to think of truth as a possession. We no longer do. We think of it as an aspiration. Well, if you only think of truth as an aspiration, then the best you're going to get is your truth and my truth. Joe, the first truth, and Joe, the second truth. And when those two truths collide, and neither Joe recognizes anything called the truth by which to settle the argument, then Joe 1 imposes his power on Joe 2, or Joe 2 imposes his power on Joe 1, or more likely, one of you gets the state to do it for you. And then you have what Ratzinger called, in April 2005, the dictatorship of relativism. The university, as originally conceived in Catholic circles, understood that there were truths built into the world and into us that we can know by exercising the arts of reason. And that truth has been lost in an awful lot of contemporary higher education, particularly in the humanities, although now the corruptions of the moment are starting to affect the sciences as well, including medical schools, which really ought to be scaring people to death, that, you now have wokery and this notion of identity-based truth and all this other nonsense affecting the teaching of medicine.
Yeah, I don't get that. I don't know why we're going down that road. Joe, if you don't mind, I want to stay here 1 second, okay? George Weigel's joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. George, let me ask you this. I'll just make a comment, and then I'd like a comment from you. The idea, and I personally, on the front line with Joe and Joe, I love to hammer on the atheists. I think their star has fallen, the Sam Harrises of the world and the rest of them, because people see the emptiness of their arguments. But address this for our audience and for Joe and I. They and Hollywood, along with Hollywood, try to peddle the narrative that the Catholic Church, you use the word superstition, okay? The church is superstitious and fears knowledge and all these things. It's the opposite. I view the creation, the invention of the university is because the church said, no, if you explore all these different areas of human knowledge, okay, you will arrive at the truth, okay? And so the church does not fear debate and counter arguments and all these things. The church says, no, let's hash it out. And that's what, to me, and you pointed it out in your book, and I think you just alluded to it also, is that's what the university is supposed to do. But just dispel this idea that we're superstitious and we fear debate and we fear the acquisition of knowledge.
I think the best way to do that is to look at two of the most, perhaps the two most significant scientific developments of the last several hundred years. One is the tracking of the human genome, which is based on the science of genetics, which was invented by an Augustinian monk named Gregor Mendel. Okay, so there's one. And cosmology, our thinking about the immensity of the universe and its origins. Okay, virtually everybody, including Sam Harris and all of these other nitwits, if I may say.
No, we're happy you said that.
Agrees that, the universe as we know it began with the Big Bang. Whose idea was that? It was a Belgian priest named Georges Lemaitre in the late 1940s who first conceived the notion of the Big Bang, which of course coheres rather well with a proper understanding of the first several chapters of the book of Genesis. So two of the most consequential scientific breakthroughs of of modernity, of the last couple of hundred years, have been created by Catholic priests. So who were not schizophrenics. I mean, who didn't think there was my science head and my Catholic head. I mean, they were not split minds. These were guys who thought that all truths, if they are truly true, incline towards the truth, capital T, who is God, as iron shavings incline toward a magnet. And when you lose that, then you get what we see too often in our culture today, which is the utter incoherence of knowledge. Things simply don't fit together. Now, while we're on the subject of the nitwits, it is interesting that I think it was last year, that Richard Dawkins, who was one of the principal nitwits, and who, by the way, got absolutely taken apart in a YouTube debate with my dear friend, the late Cardinal George Pell, which I think you can still find on YouTube. In any event, Dawkins said, look, I'm a cultural Christian. I mean, in terms of what makes for a decent society and a decent culture, I'm a cultural Christian. Well, okay, you're now out to the 10-yard line, and maybe we can get you down the rest of the field before you check out and meet the truth, capital T. So I think you're right that project has run out of gas. It never should have had too much gas in the first place, because it was so manifestly silly in its description of what biblical religion is in fact about. Because biblical religion has helped save intellectual life for the Western world. How? Okay, well, the Greeks gave us the idea that there are truths built into the world and into us. Biblical religion gave us the idea that that's because this world we know was created through the word, the logos, or if you will, the reason of God. And God imprinted God's own rationality into the universe, which is why the universe makes sense. It's why it does fit together. It's why math works. It's why physics works. Well, it turns out if you throw the God of the Bible over the side, throw the divine reason, if you will, over the side, then you start getting nervous about whether human reason can actually get at the truth of things, or whether there are any truths to get at in the first place. So the marriage of biblical religion and Greek reason was absolutely fundamental to what we know as Western civilization. And the irrationalities we see all around us are beginning to wake people up to the fact that actually you need both.
When I hear a lot of atheists, like, Joe and I, we again, George, we're doing a podcast, we're on the radio, so we're forced to look to see what other people are doing. We try not to scroll too much. But what you do find with a lot of ex-atheists is just that, is that they see order in the universe, they see logos, but then you listen to any of the prominent atheists, and then they promote science, which requires order and logos, or else it doesn't work, okay? And one quick comment, and I'm going to hand it over to Joe, is I remember when I saw Richard Dawkins say that about he wants to live in a Christian culture, my immediate response, my wife thought I was crazy because I yelled at the TV. I said, go get your own. Go create your own. If atheism's so great, you should have created one. But they did, and you know all about it. It's called the Soviet Union, and that didn't work out so well. George Weigel is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Pomp, circumstance, and unsolicited advice, commencement addresses, and university lectures available at Ignatius Press and other places. I'll put the link for Ignatius in the in the comment box. Click there, go right to the website, go buy the book. More importantly, go read the book. Joe Rossinello.
I want to talk a little bit about, we alluded to it already, but I want to expand on it. What happened to the Catholic University in America? There are prelates that would say nothing. Everything is okay. I am not a prelate, but I would disagree with that. Clearly, I have seen, I experienced it, and then I could compare, say, my liberal arts education versus, say, Christendom College's liberal arts education, where I hope my daughter goes. It's vastly different. And this is what I particularly want to focus on. I remember we mentioned Benedict XVI, whom I loved. He came to Catholic University to address this conversation, and I was very keen on listening to what he said. And he, being who he was, a very humble and meek man, a holy man who I believe will not only become a saint, but be a doctor of the church. The Vatican hasn't weighed in on my opinion yet, George, but I think they will down the road. He says that there is a problem to a degree. He addresses it, and he said, the Catholic school is there for Christ alone, to build saints, not to become bankers, not to become lawyers. So it's not a secret that there is a problem. Yet it's a lion without teeth. We don't do anything about it. Like, this is my frustration as a Catholic. Why, to a degree, I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm doing something about it as a layman. I work in a corporate arena. I get fired for many of the things that I say, and I say them out loud, and I say them boldly, and I have skin in the game. I have 5 kids. So my whole point is, we identify a problem. The Pope goes to Catholic University, is very meek, very kind, but he does mention there's a problem. And then what gets done? Nothing. And
no, that's just not true.
Okay, please.
I mean, calm down for a minute here. I know.
Okay, this is me.
Yankees
This is
are
you.
down
Let's do it.
Yankees are down 2-0, and the Mets, with, as someone wrote, a payroll the size of the budget of a medium-sized emirate, didn't even make the playoffs. So you guys need to chill a little bit in New York here. Let's go to the problem first. Where did the problem come from? In the late 60s, a lot of the leaders of what were then, really quite fine Catholic institutions of higher education somehow bought the idea that they had to imitate what we used to call in 1950s television advertising the high price spread. You have to be like Harvard or Yale. You have to be like Stanford or Duke. The problem with that was not that Catholic universities shouldn't aim for academic excellence and social and cultural impact. It's that Harvard and Yale and Stanford and Duke were losing their minds at just about that point. They were abandoning the notion that there's a body of knowledge that every educated person should encounter. So they're getting rid of core curricula and academic requirements. They are creating lifestyle chaos on campuses. And a lot of very highly regarded and in some cases well-paid professors are no longer teaching. They're leaving the teaching assistants to do the teaching, and the big dogs are just doing graduate education. So when the Catholic universities began to imitate that, they began to lose their distinctive Catholic identity and that distinctive Catholic understanding of the university. However, there have been, and that, by the way, that corruption of the prestige universities has continued and produced what you saw in Manhattan on the campus of Columbia 2 years ago, which was a complete disgrace, in which the adults lost control of the university and let a bunch of overprivileged, undereducated snowflakes take charge, chant genocidal and anti-Semitic slogans, and nothing happened. Okay, the good news is there really are a fair number of solid Catholic liberal arts colleges and universities in the United States. You mentioned Christendom. They're up the road from me in Front Royal, Virginia. The University of Dallas, where my two daughters went, has the most demanding undergraduate curriculum in the country, and it prepares you for anything. Benedictine College in Kansas, the University of Mary, in Bismarck, Thomas Aquinas College in California. The list goes on and on and on. These are really first-class institutions of higher learning. Belmont Abbey College in North Carolina. So there's plenty out there on the menu. And in addition to that, we are living in a kind of golden age of Catholic campus ministry on state college campuses. And it's much better for your kid to go to Texas A&M and meet the best Catholic campus ministry in the country than to go to a fake Catholic college where they're going to be, their faith is going to be deconstructed in theology class. Parents need to simply wake up to this and stop buying the notion that unless the kid goes to Harvard or Yale or Columbia or Stanford or Duke, they're ruined for life. That's absolute nonsense. My older daughter went to the University of Dallas and then Johns Hopkins Medical School. My younger daughter went to the University of Dallas, then New York University for Arts Education. She now runs the education program at the Park Avenue Armory Arts Center in New York, the largest arts center in the city. You can do anything with a good, solid liberal arts education.
I want to say, and I
Joe,
agree
we have
with
to take a break.
Okay, good.
Joe, we have to take a quick break here at the front line with Joe and Joe. George, one thing I'll mention, and I'm glad you mentioned it. I know that locally here, I'm in Arizona. I got out of Dodge. Joe's still in Jersey. But there's a group here. They're called Focus. You might have heard of them.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, you could say that.
Yeah, campus ministry. Those guys are fantastic, and I do my small part. Try to support them in any way I can because they're there, like you said. They're on the state campuses, and they are preaching the truth of the Catholic Church. But let's take a quick break. We'll come right back. George, this is a great conversation. George Weigel is with us. Pomp, Circumstance, and Unsolicited Advice. Commencement addresses and university lectures. George, you can let our audience know they could buy it at Ignatius. Where else could they buy the book? Amazon, other places?
All the usual online platforms. Try to support your local Catholic bookstore. If they don't have it, tell them to get it if they want to stay in business. And you can buy it directly from Ignatius Press.
And the best place for our audience, George, to find out more, see more of your work, where would they go?
There's a website called georgeweigel.com. Just my first and last name is one word.com. That's got all my books, an archive of columns going back 25 years or so. So you can get thoroughly Weigelized at georgeweigel.com.
Well, we encourage everybody to go get Weigelized. Joe and I know a fair enough about you, George Weigel. We've been following you for decades. So we encourage our audience members to do so. So stick around here at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with another great segment with George Weigel. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello. We are way in the breach with George Weigel, and we're discussing his new book, Pomp, Circumstance, and Unsolicited Advice, Commencement Addresses and University Lectures. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
Everything you said, George, 100% correct. The Newman List is spot on, and an authentic Catholic education is something that we should all seek out as Catholic parents. And I also agree with you. A&M's, Newman program, phenomenal. I also know Vanderbilt has a Versati organization, phenomenal. And even by me, Montclair State, of all places, has a thriving Newman program. These are good things. When I originally said, I have some issues with the Catholic school, it's the schools that are lagging behind. And they're expensive. I mean, I could just I don't want to pick out on schools by name, but it's not cheap. So what are we doing as a church? Again, I could just use myself as an example who work in the corporate field. I work for a global organization. If I don't do what I'm supposed to do, George, I get sacked. Like I don't understand. It's for the life of me. It's not a secret that I mean, you just look at the curriculum of some of these schools. What Latinx? What is Latinx? I don't even know what that is. That's a class at some Catholic colleges. I don't even know what it is. I had to look it up. I'm an old man, though. So, I mean, I'm out of the loop. But I mean, this is what I'm saying. Like, as a layman, if you see that, and I find it troubling, what are we doing about it as a church? I think it's very important to form our children because that's the future. And to your point, University of Dallas, Christendom, all those schools, they're doing their job. But some of them are falling behind. What's going on?
Well, these are independent institutions, Joe, and, there is no such entity called the Catholic Church that can, sit on them and say, this is how you're going to behave. What ought to have happened, though, in certain extreme cases, is that the local bishop owns the Catholic brand in his diocese. And when things get completely out of control at some of these places, when Georgetown, for example, accepts a huge gift in order to create a dormitory for LGBTQ students, the local bishop has to say, I think, in the exercise of his oversight authority, I'm terribly sorry to have to say this, but as a matter of consumer protection, I am saying that Georgetown University cannot be considered a Catholic institution of higher learning except in a vestigial or historical sense. I mean, that might, help. But you've got boards of directors who really don't, or trustees who really don't know what they're doing, who have no real idea of what Catholic education is. And of course, you've got the same faculty problems that you see at, Columbia or Duke or Stanford or whatnot. But here the problem can be solved by the magic of the market. Let me explain. 10 years ago, I gave an address at the parents' night of a prestigious Catholic prep school in the Midwest. And one of my themes was the kid is not going to be ruined for life if they don't go to Harvard, Yale, Duke, Stanford, or whatever. And I got tremendous pushback from the parents. No, the kid has to go to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Duke, or they're going to be ruined for life. The next morning, before I flew out, I was having coffee at the invitation of the monks who were in charge of this place. And they said, thanks for saying that last night. We've been trying to say that for years. Do you have any suggestions? And I thought for a minute, I said, yes. Give the parents of every incoming senior next year a copy of Tom Wolfe's novel, I Am Charlotte Simmons. It's not the greatest of Tom Wolfe's novels, but it is a pitch-perfect, often rather raw, description of what goes on elite campuses in terms of both intellectual and moral degradation. When the smartest young girl from Podunk, USA goes to a prestigious school, that's Charlotte Simmons. And I said it's actually good catechetical material in that the way Tom Wolfe lays out the story, her intellectual corruption precedes her moral corruption. In other words, she goes to a philosophy 101 class and is told there is no such thing as the truth. And then 400 pages later, she's getting assaulted by the captain of the basketball team or the lacrosse team, whatever the hell it is. And she's become part of the sexual free fire zone of the university. Intellectual corruption precedes moral corruption. Get the parents to read that. I don't know whether they ever did. Probably not. But the problem is with parents. And if parents are still intent on drinking the Kool-Aid of the kid has to go to Harvard, Yale, Duke, or Stanford, or they're ruined for life, and they're willing to spend $500,000 on that, there's nothing you or I can do about it, except to tell them you're wasting $500,000 and putting your kid at risk, and here are the examples.
Well, and that's why you write what you write, and Joe and I are trying to do our small part, and trying to. One of the reasons, George, we started doing this back 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, was that we said, well, we're just regular guys. We've seen to have been able to correctly identify certain problems that are out there, and we want to help others to do the same. That's really what we're doing. We're not pulling a rabbit out of a hat, and I'm glad you said that about educating ourselves. George Weigel, let me go here. Let me pivot for a second. Talk about educating ourselves. People complain all the time. We're really interested in your thoughts on this. People complain all the time about economics, the economic situation, globalism, big. Remember the movie Monty Python's Meaning of Life? Starts with the very big corporation. It's like, that's all we have now are the very big corporations. The church has a very clear teaching, social doctrine. I know that Pope St. John Paul II, after 100 years after Pope Leo the 13th wrote Rerum Novarum, and 40 years later, I guess it was Pius the 11th wrote Quadragesimo Anno, and then Pope St. John Paul II followed it up, after 100 years, talking about Catholic social doctrine. How did Pope John Paul II deepen the social doctrine of the church? Because I think that you mentioned Kool-Aid. I think there's leftist Kool-Aid, and I think there's right-wing Kool-Aid. Okay, both of which are Kool-Aid. Okay, and the church is spot on in her teaching on the various roles of workers, of capital, and all that. I love your comments on that, because a lot of people we find that listen to the Frontline with Joe and Joe are interested in just that.
Good. Let me begin with a funny story. Peter Berger, who was one of the great sociologists of religion in late 20th century America, was also one of the funniest people on the face of the earth. And Peter once said to me, we all know that medicine grew out of witchcraft, and astronomy grew out of astrology, and chemistry grew out of alchemy. What do you suppose will grow out of economics? Every time I see people try to predict the stock market, I think of that story. What John Paul II brought to the development of Catholic social doctrine was a much more nuanced understanding of how wealth is created in the 21st century world. From Leo XIII through Paul VI, Catholic social doctrine had a kind of curiously materialistic view of wealth. Wealth was either the ground, land, or stuff in the ground. But the notion that wealth was entrepreneurship, wealth was creativity applied to material things, was not prominent in the social doctrine. John Paul II made that prominent. He understood that the wealth of nations, to borrow from Adam Smith's book title, resided in the human mind, and the application of our intellects and our creativity to stuff. And of course, the greatest example of this in our lifetimes is silicon. Silicon had been on this planet for billions of years, and it was worth precisely nothing till somebody figured out how to make a silicon microchip. And that has created the greatest expansion of wealth in human history, including the wealth that allows us to have this conversation. Mm-hmm. That's where wealth resides. Now, that gives us also a distinctive view of poverty. If if there is a fixed amount of stuff in the world, and that's what wealth is, then the primary moral question becomes the equitable distribution of that fixed amount of stuff. On the other hand, if wealth is expanding because of the application of human creativity to stuff, then the moral question shifts. Poverty becomes a matter of exclusion from the networks of productivity and exchange where wealth is created and distributed. And anti-poverty work becomes a matter of helping people acquire the skills and the habits that allow them to participate in those networks of production and exchange. It's taken a while for this idea to work its way into the texture of Catholic thought, but I think it's exactly right, and it teaches us to look at poor people not as some sort of problem to be solved with a handout, but as people with potential to be unleashed. And how do we unleash that? And education is surely one of those ways. And that doesn't necessarily mean everybody goes to college. It might mean the creation again, as was done, I think, during the Great Depression, of Catholic schools for learning the trades. You can do very well in 21st century America by being a plumber or an electrician, metal worker, a mechanic. I'm aware of one of these efforts that's underway in Grand Rapids, Michigan right now. I think it's called the Hamel Academy. And it's called
St. Joseph the Worker.
Yeah. I mean, these are Catholic trade schools where people not only learn how to you can make a couple $100,000 a year doing these things, and they're getting a serious Catholic formation at the same time. So that's something I don't discuss that in this book, but that's something to be aware of as we talk about Catholic education at the secondary and tertiary level, high school and college going forward.
George Weigel is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello, Way in the Breach. His new book, please go out and buy it. Pomp, Circumstance, and Unsolicited Advice, Commencement Addresses, and University Lectures. Joe Rossinello.
You mentioned in that last exchange, we mentioned Pope Leo XIII. Now we have Pope Leo XIV, a Villanova graduate, an American. Never thought I would see an American Pope. I'll be honest with you, when his name was called, I was watching it at work. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know who he was, to be honest with you. But when they said it's an American, I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. But we have an American Pope, which means he knows what's going on in this country. He has a deep understanding of the American church. I think that's something that is good. Where do you see his papacy moving forward, not just in the world, but in America?
Joe, let me perhaps put a little nuance on what you just described, which I think is many people's view, and it's quite understandable. I was in Rome from the day after Pope Francis died till the day after Pope Leo's inaugural Mass. And I will tell you that Cardinal Prevost was not thought of primarily as an American. He had spent a long time in Peru. He had lived in Rome for a considerable period of time, both as the prior general of his order and in his role in the Roman Curia. And if he had been thought of primarily as an American, he'd never be Pope, because Latin American cardinals are never going to vote for a gringo Pope. I mean,
why though? Like, what is the
don't like us? It's not complicated. I mean, one of the reasons why Cardinal Sean O'Malley, was a genuine candidate in 2013 was that he was thought of by Latin Americans as more or less one of them. And Cardinal Prevost was thought of in the same way. He was thought of as an international figure, not as American, even though he was born in the suburbs of Chicago. And poor man, he's a White Sox fan, which, as I wrote somewhere, means he's well acquainted with suffering here.
That's true.
Um, I don't think the Holy Father has had a particularly detailed experience of the church in the United States for several decades. So I think he's going to be on a learning curve on that front. I hope he understands just how much vitality there is in the church in the United States, that for all of our problems, which we all know, this is the most vibrant Catholicism in the North Atlantic world, and that needs to be supported. And the progress that was made under John Paul II and Benedict XVI needs to be continued by the appointment of bishops in their image and likeness. So there's that dimension of this. I think one thing that the Pope's place of birth, but even more importantly, his experience as the superior of a religious community, the Augustinians, may be very helpful, is that I think he may have more experience of managing money than his predecessors. And the Vatican is in very serious financial trouble. And there are structural reasons for that need to be addressed. And I hope that because he has had to be responsible for the economic life of a global community of religious men, that he will bring some understanding of how finance works, how investments work, how budgeting works, how transparency is essential in nonprofit organizations who rely on the generosity of others for much of their sustenance. I hope he will bring all of that to the table.
George, let me ask you this. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, George Weigel is with us. George, what is ecclesial liberalism exactly? How would you define that? And is that something that's dominant in the church, do you think?
The living parts of the world church are those that have embraced what I would call the dynamic orthodoxy embodied by John Paul II and Benedict XVI in their authoritative interpretation of Vatican II. And the dying parts of the world church are those that continue to try to make the failed project that I've been calling for over 20 years now, Catholic Light, work. Catholic Light, L-I-T-E, doesn't work. Catholic Light is sort of like Diet Coke. Catholic Light leads to Catholic Zero, just as Diet Coke led to Coke Zero over time. Why? Because in a world as confused as this one is right now, no one is interested in more ambiguity. And in my own writing during the time of the papal interregnum, I said, this is the fundamental truth that the College of Cardinals has to wrestle with. No one is interested in the church of maybe or the church of perhaps. We're surrounded by maybe and perhaps all the time. We need some conviction and we need some clarity about what those convictions are. And this was a theme that was sounded, I think, regularly during the Cardinals' conversations in April and May. I mean, look at the growth center of the Catholic Church in the world, sub-Saharan Africa. It'll be the demographic center of the world church, certainly by the end of this century, maybe by 2060 or 2070. That is not because of maybe. That is because of clarity of doctrine and clarity of moral expectation. Now, none of that means we abandon compassion or we abandon mercy. It just means we understand that sometimes the most compassionate and merciful thing we can do for people is to help them understand the truth of their situation. And in Africa, that has meant understanding the truth that you do not live in a world of evil spirits. You live in a world created by a loving creator who entered history in the person of the Son of God to direct history back on its true course. That comes as enormous liberation in certain cultural environments because it's the truth, and the truth does liberate. So that's something that we all need to think about going forward.
Thank you for that. George Weigel's joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe, we literally have about 6 minutes left, so we got one good question for George Weigel left.
I just want to say first, I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely. It has been a failure, ecclesial liberalism, and the good news is the church is moving away from it. With that said, let's talk about religious liberty. We could go to Europe. Europe is basically putting forth some ideas that are disturbing, talking about censorship. You're seeing churches being burned in Canada at an alarming rate. You're hearing some voices in America that basically are concerning to me. I mean, these are political voices, again, not to name names. And
Feel free.
fair enough. I mean, but as a Catholic who has children, it's concerning. Clearly, the ruling class of Western civilization is not leaning towards the Catholic Church. They have the levels of power. Where do you see this going?
Well, here in the United States, I think we're in better shape than we were 40 years ago when I first began to get involved in these issues, because we have had a Supreme Court that over the last 15 years, I would say, has corrected the stupid jurisprudence of its predecessors on the matter of the First Amendment. The First Amendment was never intended to drive religiously informed moral conviction out of public life. That's just a false interpretation of the First Amendment. As my friend Father Richard John Newhouse of blessed memory used to say, no establishment is meant to serve the purpose of free exercise. You don't have a federally mandated church precisely to serve the goal of the free exercise of religion, not to create what he called, in a famous phrase, the naked public square. And I think the court has begun to really understand that over the last 15 years. We've gotten a much better constitutional situation than before, although we still have to, fight these battles. So thank God for the Beckett Fund, thank God for Alliance Defending Freedom and these public interest law firms that take up the cause of religious freedom and then win cases like, the Baker in California and Colorado and stuff like that. Europe is a different question. I mean, there is an aggressive secularism that seems to be baked into the bureaucracy, the European Union bureaucracy in Brussels. And frankly, the Catholic churches and others in the EU need to learn how to push back harder on this. And they can learn from us on that because we did push back harder. You do not have to surrender to the naked public square people, or laïcité, as they call it in France. And one thing that might be pointed out on the other side of the Atlantic is that there is probably a correlation between the collapse of Christianity in much of Europe and the fact that Europe is committing demographic suicide by simply not having children. Biblical faith teaches you a certain generosity towards the future, which involves having children and raising them and educating them. Europe has stopped doing that. I mean, things are worse in Japan and South Korea and whatnot. But there is not a single country in the EU that has a replacement level birth rate right now. And that vacuum is being filled by a lot of people from a different civilizational orbit who are, frankly, making a lot of trouble in France, England, and elsewhere. So the collapse of Christianity seems to carry with it a kind of demographic winter that needs to be reflected upon in a very serious way.
Well, like you said, George Weigel, the pushback, Joe and I are of the opinion that the pushback is happening. You said it's happening here in America. Let's hope it happens in England, because when you see stories like a woman in England who was literally arrested for mentally praying in front of an abortion clinic, you say,
this is completely crazy. And, now Britain is in the middle of a big debate in Parliament over so-called assisted dying, which was much more accurately called mercy killing a few years ago. There's some pushback on that. But yeah, what John Paul II called the culture of death is having some pretty good innings these days. And the only way to beat that is by an aggressive defense of the culture of life, and by manifesting, our concern for the dying through, palliative care, hospice care, whatever, and for women in crisis pregnancies by getting them to crisis pregnancy centers, not to Planned Parenthood abortuaries.
No, absolutely. George Weigel, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I said, I wasn't just saying it's true. Joe and I have read your stuff and followed you for years. And we're very honored that you decided to come on the show to discuss his new book, Pomp, Circumstance, and Unsolicited Advice, Commencement Addresses and University Lectures. George, you're welcome back here anytime. Hopefully we can have you back on soon.
I look forward to it, fellas. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. It was our pleasure. And thank you all out there for joining us at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Download the app, share it with your friends. Wherever you see Joe and I on social media, please help us out. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.